Right. So we're focusing on how to create the event table actually to represent the use cases and also the user story. So this is what we are focusing on, and these definitions are very important, guys. Right. So every tutorial, you may have noticed that I have few notes, right? So some notes are there. So I actually strongly urging you to have a look, read through these notes. So very important, because in the test I may ask, what do you mean by the user story? So what are the contents of what is the main important contents of the user story, etc., etc., right? So just read through these things, right? So we have studied last week the use cases, right? Use cases and user stories are very important, right? Any development activity, any system development, analysis and development activity, these are the two main building blocks, I would say, right? So what do you mean by the use case? By the way, use case is the activity performed by the system, right? System in response to a request by the user, right? If the user requests something, and then so the system must respond to that request. So that is, we captured that response as a use case, right? Um, but now, as I mentioned last week, it already the use cases usually originated with the object-oriented approach, but we still use this in the in structured approach as well. So how to identify the use cases? Remember, there are two ways that we can use to identify use cases. One way of doing that is use a goal technique, right? So the use a goal technique is very straightforward. It's just we ask the user, so we list the users first, or categorize the users according to different roles they are performing, and then we do the interviews and then ask for what are the goals you are going to achieve from certain in a new system, right? And then when they explain these goals, we capture it as a use case. But more comprehensive way of identifying the use case is called the event decomposition technique, right? So in this case, we are trying to identify all the events that will impact on a given system, right? So if you can identify these events, then you can definitely identify the corresponding use case associated with that particular event, because each event has a trigger, right? So trigger is something the user has invoked, so it will give a kind of an indication to the system, right? Something has happened, we need to respond, right? So if we can capture that trigger, then we can we can actually define the use case very easily, right? So that's what we have learned last week. And also, when it comes to the event decomposition techniques, we need to identify different types of events, right? So basically, there are three types of events we have identified, right? External events, temporal events, and the state events. Sometimes state events, we call it as internal events as well. So what are the differences between these three? So the external event is the event that occurs outside the system boundary, right? So if you know the scope of the system, if you know the boundary of the system, right, whatever the event occurs outside that boundary is called the external event, right? So usually, typically, the customers are invoking events outside the system boundary, because customers' activities, of course, customers are interacting with the business, right? Your subsystem probably. Customer might be another department, right? Another subsystem, etc., etc. So the customer's activities are not concerned with our scope, right? But they just interact with our system because they may try to take some information from us, or try to input some information to our system, right? So, so we treat the customer as an external entity or external agent who invoke some external events. Um, so usually we can actually use in the event identification, we can interchangeably use external agent or the actor right? So when it comes to structured analysis, that is what we are doing this week, next week. The data flow diagram. Remember yesterday I have explained that. So in the structured analysis domain, we usually termed this person who is standing outside the boundary as an external agent. But when it comes to the object-oriented analysis, we termed it as an actor. Okay, these are the two same thing, but technically there is a little difference. So I will come to that next week. What is the difference between the external agent and actor, right? So there is a technical difference, right? But at this moment, when you're trying to identify the events, we need to treat these both as same thing. Okay. So the external event triggered by any external agent or the actor outside the system scope. Okay, so that is how we identify it. And then we have a so I have just a bit of notes here, so you can read little bit. So I just further explain with some example. And then we have the temporal events, right? So the temporal events are time based, very easy. Now temporal events are the easiest events, I would believe. So any event associated with the time, right? These are called the temporal event, right? Sometimes time to send some invoices, time to send some what do you call reminder notices, right? So if you think about the university context, you are getting timely messages, right? Probably you are getting messages from the university fees department saying, okay, time to pay your fees, right? And then even each convener sending reminders through your Canvas notifications, right? Time to time. So that is also time-based events, right? So they call temporal events. Okay. So the temporal event invoked by no one. Yeah, actually, it's generated automatically by the system. Automatically means system itself generates this. Okay. So so that is what we mean by the temporal. And then here again, I have given some notes. Just read it, some more details. And then we have the state events, right? So state events sometimes very difficult to understand, difficult to identify, I would say, even in practice. When I at the industry, I saw it's little tricky type of event to identify. Now, state events are the events actually occurs inside the system, because typically these events happen when something happens outside the system. It triggered some event in the inside. For example, the classic example is the inventory, right? Because if the customer places an order, right, that is an external event, right? Because of that order process, our inventory level may be gone down, right? It may be passed through our what you call reorder level, right? So what happens if it passes to the reorder level? We need to reorder the stocks with the suppliers. So that is an internal event. Because of that external event, our inventory has gone down because of the pass through our reorder level. That means we need to reorder the fresh stocks or fresh inventories from our suppliers, right? So we can call it as a state event because, right, because it has generated through the system itself, inside the system itself, right? So it's a bit of a tricky kind of event actually to identify, I would say. And the other important thing I mentioned in last week lecture. So when you're trying to define these use cases, right? Once you identify them, you can easily identify the use cases by identifying these event by going through this event decomposition technique. But once you identify the use case, when you define it, because you need to define the use case, you need to give a scope for that use case, right? What is the scope, right? That scope has to be has to comply with this element, so-called elementary business process level, because we don't want to define the scope for a use case for in a broader sense, right? It's not good, because if you define it very broadly, then it's actually not practical as to implement it in a new system, right? So elementary business process is the appropriate level of detail that we can identify or define the use case, right? So how to define the elementary business process? I have given the definition here. So EBP is a task that is performed by a one person in a one given place in response to one business event, right? Now always EBP is associated with one business event, right? Activated by one person in a given place, right? So that adds some measurable business value. So you need to think about, okay, if any business event, if it adds some value to the particular process, right, then it is elementary business level activity, right? And then leaves the system and its data in a consistent state. So once it activated and once it add the value, that particular activity, if it leaves the system as is, so that is the level that we need to consider to define the use case, right? Um, for example, we can't tell, okay, we can't define a use case like, okay, we handle the custom inquiry, handling custom inquiries, or handling customer or process customer or process customers. Think about like that. Process customers means it's not a kind of a well-defined one, because we don't know what do you mean by the process customer. It can be you first register a new customer in the system. It can be you are updating the existing customer detail. It can be you are adding some products to the customers, right? It can be you're finalizing the sales with the customer, etc., etc., right? But if you think about like this, process customer order, right? So that is elementary business process level, or EBP level, right? Why it is a EBP level? Because processing a customer order is a one task, right? So one task performed by one person. So it can be performed by a person or the customer himself through the web interface, right? In a one place in response to one business. So the business event is customer want to purchase the product. Because of that, he is processing his the inventories, right? Or what the products. And it adds some measurable business value, right? Because once you process that order, it will give a customer a value, right? Because that order will give a value to the customer, right? And leaves the system and its data in a consistent state. Yes, because once the order has been completed, the system is waiting for the second order by another customer, right? Right? So that is a perfect level of detail that we can capture a particular customer's order, right? Or handling the particular customer's order. So you can define in a such a way, right? So define in a such a way that it comply with elementary business process level. Right, so these are the things I may ask in your questions, right? What do you mean by EBP? So I'll give you a small scenario and ask, okay, is this a EBP? It can be yes or no kind of question, right? Or maybe I can give a definition and ask you to, okay, fill the blank. What do you mean by this definition? What is this phrase means? Phrase means, okay, that is elementary business process. So you need to just fill the blank, right? It's everything is there, right? So the questions that I'm going to ask in next week, multiple choice and fill in the blank, it's hidden in these notes, right? So if you read it, and then I have done some questions and answers in past week, few weeks, so just go through these things. Yeah, so these are the things you need to know, right? So once we have identified all these use cases, what we can do is we need to organize it, isn't it? Right? We need to organize it, because the development team later on, they need to have a kind of a bunch of use cases, and the events in front of them, then they can actually go through the other system development lifecycle core processes. So how are we going to organize it? By using an event table, right? Using the event table, okay? So event table is a kind of a table with rows and columns, right? So these are the things we need to include in the event table. So basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things, right? So usually 6 things we need to include in the event table. What is the type of the event? So event, we need to give a description. That's the first column. And then the trigger, right? So what do we mean by the trigger? Trigger is how the system knows that particular event has happened, right? For example, in this case, if the customer wants to check whether the product is available, customer inquiry is the trigger, because when the customer inquiry comes in with respect to some specific product, then the system knows we need to respond, right? So customer inquiry is the trigger. And then the third column is a source. Who is actually triggering this, right? Now usually here we need to state who is the external agent, right? So in this case, the customer. If it is a temporal base, there is no source, right? Remember the temporal base, no source. So the trigger is the time in the temporal events, okay? So we'll do some two examples today. So don't worry, I will re-explain this. And then we need to identify, okay, what is the appropriate use case in this particular context, right? So in this case, it's lookup item availability or search item availability, okay? And then the response. So any use case has to have a response, right? So use case is a process, it's a mini process. So a process means then there has to have some kind of an output. That is what they mean by the response. So in this case, in this example, the output or the response is the item availability detail. When the customer requests some availability information, we need to give the availability details back to the customer. That is what is meant by the response. So the destination is who is getting this information, right? In this case, the customer. Sometimes in some use cases, actually sending information to multiple destinations. It can be sent to another department, it can be sent to another subsystem, it can be sent to the external agent, another external agent called bank, and also it can be sent to the customer, or maybe it can be sent to a department manager, etc., who is not comes under the scope of the system, right? Right. So these are the things actually we need to we have mentioned in terms of use cases, right? And then I have explained the user stories, right? So user stories, usually user stories tend to use in a more agile kind of development areas, right? So we will learn agile development later on. Object-oriented agile kind of areas, because sometimes some projects are very highly complicated, even we can't define the scope very clearly, right? So in this case, what we can do is we can ask users to define some stories, or we can ask them, or we can request them to define, okay, what is your goal, what are you trying to achieve from this system, or how are you going to, what you're going to achieve to solve this particular problem or to grab this opportunity, right? So we can ask them to write kind of a story. So it's a kind of a one short sentence that we try to define using everyday language. So it's actually state what is the user is expecting, what is he going to do, right? So there is a kind of a template that we can use, right? So this is the template we can use as a role. I want to achieve something, that is the fun. Now something means this is the functionality of the system, okay? Some kind of functionality you need to define, right? Or the goal, we can call it as a goal, right? So as a user, so as a maybe say a bank teller, I want to process deposits, right? So that I can save more customers, right? So that is the benefit, right? Something like that. So I have just here explained what do you mean by each of these. So just read it. So I gave some bunch of examples here as well. And then each user story, once you define the user story, it has to accompany with the so-called acceptance criteria, right? So why we need, what do we mean by the acceptance criteria? These are the features that we must present, or it must present for the user to satisfy with the resulting implementation. What do you mean by that? Once you implement this so-called user story, so these are the acceptance. These are the things that we need to reflect in that functionality that we're trying to implement, right? What that user trying to request, right? So these are the things that we need to include or reflect. Right. So the acceptance criteria usually so these are not features, these are the functionality, right? They have to be focused on the functionality as well. So usually 4 5 acceptance criteria per user story, that is the normal standard. uh, Now the reason why we put these acceptance criteria, guys, because nowadays, as I mentioned before, the projects are very agile. We need to be okay. I mean, we can't expect what is the outcome is, right? So once you define these acceptance criteria, so we can actually use these acceptance criteria as a testing, or yeah, or for the testing purpose. For example, once we develop some functionality for the system, we can go through this acceptance criteria and see whether these functionalities we develop is meeting these acceptance criteria. If it is not meeting acceptance criteria, what will happen? We can't pass that particular piece of piece of software that we have developed, right? Because we in the agile systems or agile environment, we develop the system into piece by piece, right? We are not going to develop the whole system at once, piece by piece. What is the most critical pieces, we develop it first, right? So having created these acceptance criteria, actually it facilitate for development team to test, okay, we haven't met that, so we need to go back to our drawing boards again, right? So let's go back and see what's going on, what happened, right? What happened in some program. Maybe the codes are not really written in some areas, or maybe the coders or the programmers may have wrongfully thought that something else, but it has been something else. So something like that. So we can go back to our drawing boards and then we can recreate the piece again, right? So that is the main importance of having acceptance criteria. Okay. Yeah, so these are the things that so, and then I have given in these notes what are the key differences between the use case and the user story. So the main key difference is use cases are written from the from the point of view of the system, right? But it's not actually user friendly from users perspective. They can understand very well. But user stories in everyday language, so we can actually it's about the needs of the user. So it's the users can actually read and understand about the user story without having any issue. And then the use cases are about the behaviors you are trying to build on the software to meet those needs, but the user stories are the user side. It's their goals that you are trying to achieve. So likewise, there are some few differences. So I just strongly urging you to just read this note before you move into next week test. Right. So having said that, so this week we have a bunch of questions, but it's all case studies, right? So I don't want to give you direct theory kind of question. It's not, no point. So what we need is the application, right? So we know these concepts, how we're going to apply that these concepts into given specific situation, right? Right, so we have 1, 2, 3, I think 4 questions. I'll actually leave the last one. The last one is a normal, usually our Acme Garage case study, the continuation. So I'll keep this one for the next session. So let's focus on the first three questions for today, right? So because we need to refresh again our minds again then on Thursday. So that is, I think, the best way rather than doing everything in a one session. All right. Okay. So let's actually now we get kind of a little bit background. So let's do the first case study. Now I want your input, right? Because this is something actually because since we are delivering this online, I don't know how, because I need to get a kind of an idea how you have learned these concepts, because it's no point that I just telling everything. It's a one-way kind of communication, but I like your input, but I'll give you some time to think about, but I'll give you my feedback, my answers later on, right? So let's go through the first case study. So what we need to do in this case, review the procedures for course registration at the university, Swinburne University, right? Now you know exactly the course registration, how you enroll, what is happen next, right? So if you think about that, so think about the sequence that goes on over an entire semester, right? What are the events that as you, right, as a student, you triggers? What are the events do you think you are triggering in the course registration system? Okay. And what are the events that your own department or the Swinburne Academy triggers, right? What do you think we are triggering or Swinburne Academy is triggering? So what are the temporal events that result in information going to the students? So are there any temporal events associated with information that you are getting in, right? So what do you think? What are the temporal events do you think? And what are the temporal events that result from information going to the lecturers or the departments, right? Okay, so temporal events, as I mentioned before, time based, right? So any event has a time, specific time, that is a temporal event. So what you need to do is list all these events and resulting use case, right? Resulting use case that should be included in the system, right? So what I actually like to know with you guys, the list of events, and probably the use case associated with that particular event, right? Can everyone, I want actually, now we have around 10 to 15 students, I want you to think about this, and I'll give you little time. I want you to now just go through the sequence. So what is your first thing you have done, right? In order to enroll, is there any event associated with that? How the system or how the university process has responded to you, right? Then did it trigger something else from you, right? Something like that. It will be go like a sometimes zigzag way, right? You triggering something and the system triggers some response, and then because of that information you trigger something else, and then the system again send something in response, right? So likewise, if you think about the whole process, the enrollment or registration process, you will think, you will come up with the list of these things, right? So let's focus on this, and I'll give you around 5 to 6 minutes. I want everyone to give a try, right? Give a try, because this is really important, guys. Because then I'll give my answer, right? So I'll give you 5 minutes to think, and then just type your answers here. What I want is uh, maybe a list of events. Maybe list of events is enough at the moment. Just send the event list that do you think, and then just type whether that event is a temporal event or external event, right? Can you do that? I'll give you 5 minutes, and I'll wait for your response. Okay. So now it's 6 past 1. So I'll give you 5 minutes. So you'll come another 5 minutes time. I'll stay here until you respond. Okay. 5 minutes. Thanks. Any progress, guys? Anyone who like to share something? Who is going to initiate? Darcy, you can initiate. Or Maria Alam. Or Michaela. Precious, Spencer, Rian, Trung, Jingsen. Right, so okay, so it's a good try, Michaela. So good. Okay. Okay. Right, so good try. I think some of these are correct. Yeah. How about others? Darcy, do you have any idea? Maria, Precious, Rian, Trung, Spencer, Chingsen. So what we can do in this case, I just open a new one. Actually, this is something else. So it's actually let's go to I'll open a Excel sheet. So this is question one. Question one. Question one. So they want the maybe we can say actor who is triggering the event. So the actor, just put actor, then let's say that is the event, then the resulting use case, or maybe we can say sorry, type of event, then type of event, let's make it a little bigger, and the use case. Right. So let's make a small table or something like this. Okay, so let me make something nicer. Okay, so the headings. Right, so let's think about according to this question. This is a course registration system, right? So let me cut that one so I know the system that I am focusing on. So course registration system. So let me make it a little right. So the question is asking the sequence. Think about the sequence that goes over an entire semester. What are the events that students trigger? What are the events that other department triggers? Right. So there are two stakeholders, right? So two what do you call external agents, right? Department, the Swinburne College or Swinburne Academy entirely, and the students, right? So let's take about Swinburne Academy. So let's say yeah, Swinburne, right? So that is my first actor or the external agent. Actually, I write actor slash external agent. Right, so what are the events? So the first event is we need to make timetables, right? Right, so each semester the department is making timetables, right? So so we can say department wants wants to create semester timetable, right? Department wants to create the semester timetable. Okay, so that is the event, right? So what is the type? What is the type of event? Um, in terms of the course registration system, so we take Swinburne Academy, or maybe we can say actually not the Swinburne Academy. We can say for example curriculum department or curriculum. Um, um, so it's all right. Well, let's say Swinburne Academy. It's okay. Let's think about Swinburne Academy as an external agent or actor. So the event is they want to create a semester timetable. So the type of event, let's say the type of event is, I would say it's an external event, right? So it's an external event in terms of the course registration system. The appropriate use case to handle this event is create timetable, right? Create timetable. So one verb, one noun, right? Create a timetable. Okay, so it's very clear. So Maria is asking, what does the student or department trigger mean? Yeah, okay. So these are the triggers, right? So this is department triggers. So let's come to the student triggers later on, okay? And then what is the next one? So let's go to the student now, right? So okay, so we create the timetable. So the department create the timetable. Now it comes to the students. So let's say the student. Right? So the event is student want to enroll into a class, right? Um, enroll into a class. So that's the event. That is the event triggered by a student, right? As the first event. So okay. So then that's an external event. So let's say it's external event. So the use case um, to address this event, the use case is enroll in a class or enroll in class or enroll classes. That is the process. So if I develop something, I need to have a kind of a process to handle this enrollment, right? So Chingsen can be looking for offer course from the uni. Now here Chingsen, the thing is this: we need to now in this case, I think the Michaela also mentioned that. So we need to assume that the course offering already completed, right? So what you are doing is here enrolling into a specific timetable and then enrolling into specific subjects, right? And then that is the process we are talking about here. So not the course offering or course acceptance, etc., etc. It may be handled by another system, right? This is another system. This is the enrollment system or scheduling system. Okay, right? So it's quite two different things. Okay. Um, so we create the timetables and then students are enrolled in the timetables, right? And then what else? What's you are normally doing? You may be thinking, okay, I wanted to um, change the time. I don't want this timetable. I want to go to another timetable, isn't it? It's happened, right? Because I'm busy. This will not going to fit with my schedule because I'm working, etc., etc. Right? So let's actually capture that, right? The student. The next event is students want to change timetable, isn't it? That is another event. That is a very good another good event actually. That's often happen, right? Once you enroll, right? So that is also an external event. So it's external. So you can. So what is the appropriate use case to deal this specific event? Change timetable. right? Or change enrollment or something like that. Okay, or in other words, we can say update class enrollment, right? Something like that. Okay, right. So that's another event, right? So then what? And then what will happen for you guys? Maybe say for example, now it comes to what do you call this? What is this date? Can't remember. Census date, right? So when the census date reach, what will happen, right? Census date reach, you want to drop a course, right? When you drop a subject, right? So again, it's triggered by the student, right? Students. So students want to drop a unit, right? Student want to drop a unit, isn't it? So we need to handle that event as well. So that is also, it's not a temporal event. It's not a temporal event, even though the time has been reached. Students actually activate that because students think that okay, I want to drop a unit because it's too complicated for me. Okay, so it's an external event, right? So we need to handle it, right? So the use case is, maybe you can say drop enrollment, right? Drop enrollment, um, something like that. Okay. Then so basically I think these are the three things the students will perform, isn't it? And then okay, then what? Then are there any, now they also asking us to identify some what do you call temporal events, right? Temporal events that result in information going to the students. What are the temporal events that result in information going to lecturers and the departments, right? Okay, so now we have identified the event triggered by the academy, event triggered by the students. So basically they are the external event. So then they ask us to go, okay, let's list some temporal events. So temporal events are time-based events, right? So another temporal events. So the temporal events, remember, there is no actor externally, so I just leave it as it, right? And then I can write it in the event column. Maybe we can say we need to produce some grades for the students, right? Produce grades for the students, right? Because each assessment has a due date, right? So we need to produce grades for the student for that particular system, for that particular assessment. So we can say there is an event, right? So temporal event, we can say time to produce assessment results, right? Time to produce assessment results. So there is a time-based event, right? So there is no external event associated with this, so I just leave it blank. So this is the time, so I just put time, right? So it depends on assessment to assessment, right? So the type of the event is temporal. I just put temp. Then the use case is produce assessment results. It can be a manual one, but it's a process, right? It's a use case, right? Produce assessment results. Assessment results. Then what else? Then at the end of the semester, we need to produce final grades for the students, right? So we can say, okay, time to produce final grades, right? Final grades. Okay, so it's again a temporal event because it happens based on the time. So end of the week 13, right? So that's the time. So actually we can mention it here. Maybe we can mention it here. Time to produce final grades. Maybe we can say you can put the hyphen and say at end of week 40, right? At end of week 40. It's a temporal, and then we can have a use case. So similar like this, we can say a use case is produce final grades or process final grades or produce final grades, right? So that is a temporal event. All right, so that these are the things that goes to the student, right? These are the events that temporal event that impact the information goes to the student, right? But again they ask, so we completed this for temporal event. And then the second part, the third part is what are the temporal events that result in information going to the lecturers or the faculty members, right? All right. So are there any temporal events associated with anything that it comes to us, right? So here, probably you don't know that, but we are getting attendance report, right? Student attendance report each week, each Monday actually. Monday we are getting attendance report saying, okay, these are the students who attended, these are the students not attended, right? Okay, so we can say that's a temporal event, right? Because it's time based each Monday. So we can say that event as time based. So we can say, okay, time to produce student attendance report. Time to produce student attendance report. So let me like here I just note it here every Monday, right? Every Monday until end of week 30. Every Monday until end of week 30, right? So I just clearly define the event, right? So it's again the temporal event. And then the use case is weekly, or you can say produce weekly attendance report. Produce weekly attendance report. Actually, I forgot to mention because we need to put a destination, right? We need to put a destination column because we need to tell, okay, the information to whom this information is going, right? So let me make another column, right? So this information goes to a timetable. Creating timetable information goes to two types of external agents, right? It goes to the students, and also it goes to the faculty members, right? So students, I just put students and faculty members. Students and faculty members. Okay, this one, the second event, enroll the class details goes to students, right? But not the faculty members, but if you go to the administration. Dropping update the class enrollment, it goes to the students. And administration again. And then again the dropping things, again the same thing I would say, students and the administration. Time to produce the assessment results, it goes to the exclusively for the students. And then time to produce final grades to the students and administration I would say. And then a time to produce student attendance reports. So attendance reports goes to faculty, right? Faculty members, right? What else? Yeah, I think that's these are the events list that can be handled by a course registration system. So we have external events and some bunch of temporal events, right? That's what exactly this question is asking us to do. Right now, remember when you name the events, right? When you name the external events, so we usually tend to write the external when you're naming it. You need to disclose who is the external agent involved in that particular event. So you can see in each of these events I named it appropriately, indicating who is the external agent or the actor triggering that event, right? And then when it comes to temporal event, always try to use the time first. So time to produce, time to produce, so time to produce, etc., etc. And then whenever possible, just indicate the time frame. For example, here in this case, at the end of week 14. In the next one, every Monday until end of week 30, right? So it's clear. So anyone who is looking our this table, it has a kind of a clear idea. So how to organize their, if it's a programmers, they can actually appropriately program these codes to automate this system, right? So in likewise, this is what actually they ask in question number 1. Okay. So everybody, is it clear this question? My answer, is it clear? I want your feedback. Is it clear my explanation regarding so now how you to handle, how to focus in a particular system, and how to what you can do is, if you think about in your particular subsystem, think about the transaction sequence of transaction. What are the transactions? What is the sequence? And then you can actually see the event, the type of events that it will that will occur, right? So Chingsen, you have, I feel confused between external and temp. Okay, it's very easy, Chingsen. What is the difference between external temporal event? Is very easy. Temporal event is temporal event always associated with the time, right? Always associated with time. Any event associated with time. For example, time to produce course schedule, time to produce assessment result, because they has a specific deadline, right? Specific deadline. So when that deadline happens, that event has to be triggered in that particular deadline when it reached, right? So then if you know these deadlines, so the critical times in your system, right? Then you can think about what are the temporal event which has associated in that particular critical time. But isn't there is a deadline for enrolling in a class? Yes, enrolling in a class is a deadline, but in this case, I haven't actually used it as so we can actually have another event. Actually, that's very good. Michaela mentioned that. Actually, we can have another temporal event, right? Now this is a student want to change. Sorry, here in this case, right? So we can have another event saying, okay, send the reminders. So we can have actually another event. Now let me put another event. In this case, insert. You can have a temporal event. Let me create a temporal event in this case. Send. So time to, let's say, time to send late enrollment notices, right? Time to send late enrollment notices, right? So this is actually a temporal event, right? There is a temporal event because we know that there is a particular deadline, but there is no event happen so far. So I just created another event. So we send late enrollment notices to the student when the enrollment deadline has been passed. Okay, now deadline has been passed or something like that. So that is a separate event, right? So likewise, you can. It's up to you. It's up to you. If you think that okay, your system need to handle that particular case, then you can create that event, right? But I haven't created earlier because I thought it's not necessary. But it's good point. So so use case is process late enrollment. Right, something like that. Okay, so it goes to the students administration. Right, so likewise you can think about the distinctions between these two. Okay, so is it clear now, guys, or do you still it's not clear, these two things, two aspects, external event and the temporal event? So you got some idea. How about Michaela? You clear? Little clear, at least some sort of clearance is there. Yeah. Okay. How about Darcy? Darcy, Maria, others, Precious. I want everybody because this is, I don't want anybody left, right? Be frank, I want my team to because to perform really well, because we have another 2 tutors. I don't want others to perform. My student to perform. I want my class to perform well. Yeah. Can you also please explain state event? Okay, state event, Maria. State event is the event happen now, as I mentioned before. Now let's think about any state event here. Any state events? Okay, think about it. Something happen inside the system, right? So let me think. So you need to actually think. Say right, okay, let's think about like this, right? So say for example, we have a quota, enrollment quota. We have maximum number of students we can actually enroll for a given subject for a given semester because of the resource limitations, right? Then that is actually a state event, right? So for example, the event is so we can say maximum, right? Maximum enrollment quota has reached, right? Maximum enrollment quota has been reached, right? So that is an event, right? So right now, what will happen? It's an internal event or the state event, right? Because we have lots of students enrolling here, right? Now this particular event. If you think about this, right, this is triggering, hundreds of students are enrolling, right, and then because of that this has been triggered. Now we are coming to maximum quota. So we need now, then that is a state event. Because of this event, this has been triggered, right? So it's a state event. So that means we need to now produce some report maximum to management saying maximum quota has been reached, right? Something like some report. Okay, so then the management can make appropriate decisions whether to increase the maximum quota for the enrollment or keep it as is, right? Okay, so now let's give a use case for this. Produce enrollment quota report. Produce enrollment quota report. So it goes to the management, right? Right. So it's a state. How this state event happened? Because of this, right? Okay. So Maria saw that the state event occurs under the other. Yes. So usually 99% times the state event happens because of the external event. Because of the external event, right? Not because of the temporal event, because of the external event most of the time, right? It depends on the scenario. Okay. So is it clear? Is it clear between these three types of events? External events, internal events, or the state events, and the temporal events. Yeah. Right. Okay. So Darcy, Spencer, Rian, how are you guys? And Precious, I want your feedback. Are you clear about the concepts that I have discussed? Because this is very important. Because if you don't get it, you can't apply this concept into your project, right? Yeah, Rian is clear. So thank you, Spencer. Thank you. How about Darcy? Are you there? Are you listening to me? Is it clear? Mostly okay, right? So guys, if you need any assistance or anything, clearance or anything, Fridays I am actually free. I can make a kind of an appointment. Just drop me an email, okay? So usually I don't have a kind of a consultation time, but if you want to some time, you just send me. Usually Fridays 10:30. I'm clear, so I'll make a consultation with the Microsoft Teams, so you can have a one-on-one chat. Okay. Right. So that is the answer to basically the question mark. So you can apply the same concept now to your project as well. Okay. Right. So let's jump to the question number 2. Right now they are asking us to construct an event table, right? So event table to identify the use cases for the videotape checkout system, right? This time videotape checkout system based on the following description, right? So they have given bunch of descriptions, occurrences, I would say occurrences, or narration or narratives, bit of narratives. So we need to create event table, right? So event table, now remember one of the slides in last week, I have given you a template for the event table, right? So this is the template for the event table. So based on this, so you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns, right? So almost we have created the event table here, but so we need to create a formal event table like this for that particular question. So I'll give you 10 minutes for this question. I'd like you to create this. So open an Excel sheet. it's easy to do within Excel sheet actually, and then copy and paste into the Word document. What you need to so apply this um, scenario and create this event table. I will give you again 5 to 6 minutes. I would like you to attempt first. Please attempt it, right? Don't wait until I just give the, because I just want your to your thinking to trigger, because if you take my answer, then you will it's okay to make mistake. It's okay because it's a learning journey, right? So everybody will make mistake. That's fine. But I like you to now you have a bit of knowledge now, right? So just go through each sentence. Perhaps may contain one event or maybe two events, right? Who knows, right? So you need to very carefully read the sentence, right? Now that's why reading is very important in this subject, right? It's very tricky. These are the narratives. These are narratives created by some business analyst. So we need to understand how they created it, what they meant in each sentence, right? So that is the important thing. Even if you go to the IT field, it's very important because when you read the narratives, because I made sometimes very difficult. People create narratives. When we read it, it makes sense. It doesn't make sense sometimes. I may think something else, but actually they meant something else, right? So how are you going to exactly pick the meaning is very important. Okay, so let's read this. I'll give you 5 to 6 minutes. Develop this event table for it looks like there are 5 points there, 5 dot points, but I don't know how many events they have in each center. There may be a couple of events sometimes, or maybe one event. Just create using this template. Open an Excel sheet and try to develop. I'll give you 5 to 6 minutes to attempt, okay? And I'll just then ask your answer, and then I'll give my answer, okay? All right. Any answers, guys? Anything you'd like to share in this case? So by the way, if you read the now this is the video tape checkout system. Very old case study, but I thought that it's actually good learning experience. Um, Actually, now if you think about the first one, how many events we have in the first point? Right. How many events do you think we have in the first point? Think about the element to business process, right? Uh, how many events do you think? Two. Yes, things and very good. Two events. Yes. So patron first checking out the tapes, right? And then later returning. So there are two events: checking out and the return, right? Yeah, very good. So there are two events there. Uh, so likewise, you need to think about it. Okay. Okay. So what we can do, I hope that you have done something. So let's actually try to build the event table by myself. Then maybe you can check it with your answers, right? So I'll use this template. Now always it's as I mentioned before, I'm giving the templates to you so you can follow it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 columns. I need to construct the 6-column table. So let's construct it. Event, trigger, um, actually I'll have another extra column between. I just wanted to find out what is the type of event is either external event, temporal event, etc. So the event type of event, trigger, then the source, then the use case, um, and then response, and finally the destination. So let me make this table a bit nicer. Okay, let me make it like this. With bold center. So let me. Oops. So let me actually highlight it. Like this. So I put the map the test. Okay. So let's take the first event. Event number 1. So let's actually make this here. First, the patron wants to check out the tapes and then later return them, right? What is the system again? Sorry. So what I can do is video tape checkout system, right? So I just copy this and paste it here. So I know exactly this is the system I am working on. Okay. Okay, so just put it there. Now let's come to the points. The first one, okay. The patron, the patron will want to check out the text and then later return on it. Right. So there are two events, right? First, the patron wants to check out the tape. The second one is patron wants to return the tape, right? So let's write down these two events separately. So um, patron wants to uh, check out tape, right? My first event. The second event is patron returns tape. Right. So two events, right? So the type of event, what type of event is this? Patron in terms of video checkout system, patron is an external agent, right? So the event is external, yeah, that's right. So I just put external, right? So the trigger is, so what is the trigger? How do we know that this event has happened? Okay, because how the system knows that this event has happened? Because we're getting a request, right? A checkout request from the patron, right? So we can say uh, checkout request, right? Checkout request. So how do we know that patron want to return that? So let's actually do both. So how do we know the patron want to return the tape? It's actually the return tape, right? Tape return, um, tape return. Maybe we can scan it. That's why we know that okay, this has been returned, right? Um, so tape return is a trigger. So in both cases, the source is the patron, right? So patron. So I just copy this. Um, so the use case. Let's make a use case for the first one. So verb and noun use case, right? So in order to handle this event, the appropriate use case is what? Checkout tape, right? Checkout tape. Tape, right? All right. So how about the second one? How are we going to handle the second one? Patron returns the tape. Um, um, Maybe we can say uh, process uh, return tape. Return ITU, right? Return tape. Okay. Uh, yeah, process return tape. So that is okay. Okay. So right. So now we need to find out the responses. Okay. Let's say the first one, checkout tape. In this use case, what a response? What is actually we are going to give to whom? Maybe we giving maybe checkout agreement, right? Checkout agreement. We are giving it to the patron, right? So that is the response, right? And maybe a receipt or something as well, right? So but I don't want to go more details, so just put the checkout agreement, so goes to the patron. So the second one, the patron will get maybe I will say check-in agreement, right? So that's what the patron is getting in this case. Okay, so we completed these two events. So it's very straightforward, I guess. Yeah. So the first narrative we completed. We identified two use cases or two events. Right. So how about the second one? Second one says um, um, uh, sometimes a patron will neglect to return a tape by the due date and needs to remind after 5 days. So sometimes a patron will neglect to return a tape by the due date and needs to remind after 5 days. So once the due date has been elapsed, and after 5 days time, we need to send a reminder, right? So what kind of event is this? Yes, Tinsen, you are right. It's a temp. Yeah, it's a temp. It's a time-based time-based event, right? Um, so we can say it's a time-based event. So what is the event name? So we have only one event, right? So we don't have two events in there, right? So the event is the tape is overdue, right? That's the event, right? So tape is overdue, right? So it's a temporal event, right? So it's a temporal event. So how do we know? How do we know? So this, how do we know that? How, what is the trigger for this? What is the trigger for this one? So it's a time base. So we can mention 5 days past the due date, right? So usually we temporal event we just put inside the quotes, double quotes. So we can say 5 days uh, past due date. So that's a temporal event, right? 5 days past the due date. Now remember the temporal date, a temporal event, there is no source, so we keep it vacant, right? But definitely we need to have a use case to handle this temporal event, right? So what is the use case? Again, we can make a use case like produce late tape notice or late notice. Produce late, you can say late tape notice, right? Late tape notice, right? So what is the response? So this use case will generate a notice or late notice, right? Late tape notice. Who is getting this? Patron is getting it, right? That is the destination, right? Right, I think that's about. There's no two any two. There are no than one event associated in that point. Yeah, right. How about the next one? Right. Occasionally, the tape will not be returned at all and should be considered lost. Right. So usually after 20 days after due date, the library will issue a lost tape charge notice to patron and send a copy to bookkeeping section. Right. Okay. So it looks a little complicated. Let's actually first try to find out um, the event first, right? So event is what is the event? Okay. What is the event actually here? So we need to make an assumption, right? We are assuming that overdue tape is lost, right? Because it says that, right? Occasionally the tape will not be returned at all and should be considered lost, right? Considered lost. So that is the assumption, because after 20 days, if they're not returned, this is what we need to do, right? So we can say again, it's a temp. What kind of event is that? What kind of event is that? Again, it's time based, right? It's a temporal event. Yes, yeah, that's right. It's a temporal event. So we can say the event is overdue tape is, maybe we can say overdue tape is assumed lost, right? Assumed lost. That is the event, right? And it's a time based. Time based means 20 days past the due date. That is the time, right? Right. So let's write that here. So we can say overdue tape is assumed lost. Overdue tape is assumed lost. That's the event. So definitely it's a temporal event. So the trigger is usually this will happen after 20 days past the due date, right? That is what this is, right? So let's make it like this: 20 days So we need to be very clear, right? So we need to be very clear because they have mentioned the time frame here, right? So 20 days here, 5 days, right? So that means we need to very clearly mention 20 days past the due date. So again, we put this inside the double quotes, right? So likewise, again, there's no source, right? But there's a use case. So we need to handle a use case. We need to have a use case to handle this event. So let's say, so here produce late tape notice, here produce a lost tape notice, right? Lost tape notice, right? Produce lost tape notice, right? Okay, now here, so what is the response from this particular use case? Usually after 20 days, 20 days after due date, the library will issue the lost tape charge notice to patron, right? So there's a one response there, right? Lost tape charge notice to patron, and right, and this is the second response. Send a copy to bookkeeping section, right? So patron will get lost tape charge notice, and the copy will go to the bookkeeping. So there are two destinations. One is patron, one is bookkeeping, right? Okay, so let's write that here. Let's say, so we'll produce patron lost tape charge notice, right? Actually, I will take two rows, right? So this will go to the patron. Then the copy is going to the bookkeeping department, right? So let's say bookkeeping loss tape charge notice. It goes to the bookkeeping department. Okay, sorry. Bookkeeping department, right? So this is special, right? So two information flows from this use case. Okay, right. So that's about that one. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Right now, new tapes will be received by the library from time to time. Okay, so new tapes will, so we are getting some new tapes or new movies, something like that, right? Right. So how are you going to define this? What kind of so let's make an assumption here. So we assume that we are getting it from suppliers, right? We are purchasing it. Okay. So suppliers are, or maybe it can be purchasing department, right? So if you think about this is a big little bit big company, purchasing department supplies it. Okay. So how many events again we have here? Only one event, right? So basically it looks like an external event, right? Because suppliers are buying these movies or the tapes. Okay, so let's actually make use the event here. New tape is received, right? So it's an external event. So I just put ext. Maybe what is actually the trigger in this case? Maybe we can say it's an invoice. Invoice of the new tape is the trigger, right? Source is a supplier. Okay. So the use case is we can say add new tape or process the new tape, something like that. Okay. So one verb, one noun. So the response is so let's say we are paying for the for the supply. So we use the same use case to process the payment as well once the invoice received, right? So let's say the payments goes to the supplier. So we can have we can do, or sometimes if sometimes what we can do is we can divide this use case into two, right? One is to handle the receipt, another one is to payment, right? So in that case, the payment probably, if you have another use case for a separately payment, that might be maybe the temporal, because we need to pay it at a certain time period or certain days. Once the invoice received within 7 days, we need to pay, right? So we can have a temporal event saying, okay, payments to suppliers um, after 5 days of invoice receipt. That is the um, uh, event trigger. So temporal event after 5 days of invoice receipt, blah blah blah. Then we can put a kind of a use case to handle that, right? But in this case, I just assumed the same use case will handle the payment process as well. So you can make that kind of an assumption. Okay, right. So that is about that. Do we have any use case in that sentence? No, right? So we have only one use case, very direct use case, right? Right. So now we can go to the last one. So the last one is the library management will want information about the tape checkout activity about once in a month, right? So checkout activity, so they need a report, right? So how many checkouts we have, so they can determine some strategy. Can we expand business because how our sales are going, etc., etc. So they need a report. So what kind of activity or what kind of event is that producing this report? Is it a time based or is it um, external event, or what? Is it a state event? Any idea about the last one? What kind of event is that? Temporal or what? Temporal, yeah, because it's a time base, yeah, because every month, once in every month, we need to generate some reports to the management, right? So it's very easy. So let's write down that. We can say time to produce monthly. We can say monthly tape activity report, right? So it's a temporal. So there is no trigger. Sorry, the trigger is last day of each month, right? Last day of each month. It's very clear, right? Last day of each month. There is no source, but we have the use case. I can say the use case is produce monthly activity report. Produce monthly activity report. So the response is obviously, what is the response? What we are generating here? Activity reports, right? Or monthly activity report. That is what we are producing. It goes to management. Right, that's it. So that's actually about this question, right? So basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there are 6 events that we can handle in this video tape checkout system. So